Welcome to another edition of Good to Know on PCC-TV. I'm your host, Nick Zoller with Pinellas County Communications. When most of us think about identity theft, we tend to think about credit cards and bank accounts. Did you know that criminals have fraudulently obtained billions of dollars in tax refunds from the IRS by stealing identities? Over the last several years, one of the most costly forms of identity theft has been tax-related, and Florida has led the nation in number of cases for much of that time. Joining us today are James Robnett, Special Agent in charge of IRS Criminal Investigations, and Anna Marie Millett, Investigator and Outreach Coordinator with Justice and Consumer Services. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Evan.
So I think the first thing that a lot of people think of when they hear tax-related identity theft is, what is tax-related identity theft?
That is when someone steals your personal information and files a tax return in your name. And in most cases, those individuals are doing it for purposes of receiving a false refund that they've devised through putting false information on the return.
And Anna Marie, I know you do a lot of talks in the community. Have you heard a lot about this?
Definitely. I give presentations in the community on a regular basis, and at each presentation someone approaches me and lets me know that they've not only been a victim of identity theft, but had they're using a special PIN for tax return identity theft.
So, Jim, why did this become such a big problem? I mean, it seems that now it's on the news all the time and people are really focused on this issue, but when I've read about it, and I'm sure others have read about it, there have been years of examples of this going on, and it's just continued to become a bigger problem.
Well, IRS has worked really hard to make it easy for taxpayers to file tax returns. Most of that emphasis has been towards electronic filing, which is a mandate for us. And that's converged with a lot of personal information that's maintained on the internet. And most of that personal information is the same information that appears on tax returns. So the criminals have taken advantage of that and sought to file false claims in real taxpayers' names.
Okay. And when did you both first notice this problem? Anna Marie?
It's been a few years now that we've seen an increase in, Florida has been #1 for identity theft for probably the last 5 years, if not more. And as with the technology and the use of internet, tax identity theft has increased as well. So it's been quite a while now.
And Jim, when did the IRS start noticing this problem?
IRS has noticed it for a couple of years now as it has increased and as the information has been available. We've put a lot of safeguards in place, both on the high side where our systems have caught a lot of the false claims being submitted, as well at a local level. We've had a lot of success identifying and prosecuting those criminals that are taking your information and taxpayer information to file false claims and reap those benefits.
And Jim, do you have a recent example of a case locally?
Sure. Locally, there have been a lot of individuals prosecuted, and this doesn't happen with just one individual doing the whole criminal act. It often involves 4 or 5 people, someone to steal the ID, someone to prepare the returns, and someone to have the information delivered to a certain location so they can spend the money. Locally here, a particular case out of James Haley Veterans Hospital, an individual by the name of David Lewis, who was a medical assistant there, admitted to stealing more than 100 identifiers, personal information of wounded warriors that were being admitted to the hospital. He and others used that identifying information to file false claims. Now that case we thoroughly investigated with our Pinellas County law enforcement counterparts, and that David Lewis pled guilty to that crime. He pled guilty to aggravated identity theft and received more than 6 years in federal prison. As well, we used the Veterans Administration Department of Inspector General's office assisted us in that as well.
I found an interesting case just when I was reading about this topic because I didn't know a lot about it before, but can you tell us about this woman from Tampa who called herself the queen of IRS tax fraud?
Right.
How did she steal so many millions of dollars?
Well, she had access to, through her friends and other conspirators, personal information from some local medical facilities, and a lot of that information that at that time, years ago, was maintained online. Social Security Administration for a while had a significant portion of information, personal information, Social Security numbers, names, dates of birth online. So she gathered that from a lot of locations, and her and many of her conspirators submitted false claims in the names of real taxpayers. And a lot of that was done prior to us knowing the emergence of this criminal activity. So much of that information got through. False refunds were paid, and she and many of her conspirators were got the benefit as proceeds.
Anna Marie, has Justice and Consumer Services noticed any influx in calls about identity theft since tax-related identity theft got bigger?
Definitely. Just in the past week, I've received 2 phone calls from consumers who receive calls of individuals posing as IRS agents or some official claiming that they owe money they're collecting, or that there is warrant out for their arrest, so they need to pay immediately to avoid further action. Fortunately, they had the sense enough to call us to report it, and also to ask for additional information as far as, could this be legitimate? You know, should they be concerned? What's the next step? So consumers are becoming more aware, and that's important. We need to arm them with the information to reduce their chances of falling victim to scams and the fraud in general.
Definitely. And Jim, how does someone know if they're a victim?
Often they may get a letter from IRS saying that we've got a tax return filed in your name and these particular wages are being shown. And of course the victim knows that they didn't work there, and that his wages are a result of a criminal manufacturing a W-2 and submitting on a false claim in their name. Often when they try to file electronically, the system will indicate to the real taxpayer that there's already a tax return filed in their name. So that's another way. Now, if someone gets a letter from IRS saying either one of those things, that there's a W-2 that's been submitted in their name, or they look to have already filed a tax return, we encourage and ask that taxpayers respond to those letters. And remember, IRS does not email you about being a victim of ID theft. You'll always get a letter, and it'll look authentic. It'll have our letterhead on it, and taxpayers really need to respond to those to make sure we begin the repair process of their tax account.
Sure. And if someone has become a victim, I think that it's important to know how people are obtaining that information. How did someone, for instance, if I became a victim, how would someone have gotten my Social Security number and my date of birth?
Well, from our investigations have told us that some of the most vulnerable business segments that are suffering a breach of this information are your local medical facilities, like the example I gave earlier at the VA hospital. But there's been other hospitals, medical facilities, and any business that houses personal information. That information is only as secure as the individual that has access to it. So what I would tell taxpayers is that anytime you provide your information over for medical procedure or some other business need, know where that information is held and ask questions about how it's secured.
And Anna Marie, how can people protect themselves? What can they do? I know a lot of people, you shared with me in a conversation before, that a lot of people feel it's necessary to provide the information that's asked of them. So what do you say to Pinellas citizens who feel that way?
I say it's your information. As James was saying, you need to protect it. So anytime you are giving, there are situations where we're going to be required to give our Social Security number, bank account, credit card information. Anytime you're given personal information, question what it's being used for or who you're giving it to. If you receive an unsolicited call, letter, email, and it's requesting personal information, have them provide you that information. Don't just assume because they're asking, even if it's a legitimate situation, a medical facility, and they're saying, well, we need your Social Security number to file a claim. Double check with your insurance company, make sure that it is necessary. Just because it's on a pre-printed form doesn't mean you necessarily have to provide it. If you're not comfortable with it, ask questions and verify before you do give out any personal information.
And
Jim, are certain groups more likely to be targeted?
We've seen our elderly as a large portion of the targets, and that's often with regard to tax fraud. Many of the elderly don't have a requirement to file a tax return because of their financial status. So often false tax returns may be filed in their name, and if they're not submitting a tax return for that year, they may not even know they're a victim of tax fraud related identity theft if they don't contact IRS. So sometimes these goes on for a period of time until we can identify that and contact that citizen.
Sure. And I saw on the calendar that January 26th through 30th is Tax Identity Theft Awareness Week. What's the purpose of that week?
Well, of course, that's the kickoff of the tax filing season, so we're very aware of individuals going to tax preparers and filing tax returns. And we, on our investigative side, always have an emphasis during that period of time to make people aware of identity theft, make them aware of the potential fraud that they can be victims of. So that is our emphasis both at IRS at a national level and at our investigative unit here at a local level.
And do you know sort of a average number of how many cases there have been so far this year?
Well, the 14 stats haven't been published yet, but in 2013, we initiated more than 1,500 identity theft investigations nationally. That was an uptick at more than 66% from the previous year, and 2014 is the same. And in addition to that, what we have here locally is we've established the Tampa Bay Identity Theft Alliance, which includes your Pinellas County law enforcement. It's led by IRS-CI, and there's 15 local law enforcement agencies as part of that, including Crime Stoppers, the Attorney General's Office, and FDLE. So here locally, we have a great law enforcement team as well as other outreach efforts to minimize the impact on victims here in the county, as well as identify and prosecute those people involved in the crime.
And what do taxpayers need to do if they become victims, if their identity is stolen, a false tax return is filed, and a refund is issued to a criminal?
Well, again, on the tax fraud side of identity theft, we have special units set up, and there's 1-800 numbers that individuals can call. And we have publications. So basically, our victims of tax fraud, we have a special unit that will repair that account, but we'll have to work with the victims to make sure they can authenticate their identity to us, and so we can quickly repair that account.
And are there any forms or anything that they need to fill out with the IRS?
Exactly. There's an identity theft affidavit that describes the activity that happened, the theft at the local level for that victim. They prepare that, send it into our identity theft unit, and from there they work with a specialist to get the account repaired.
So would I fill out one of those forms only if I've become a victim of tax-related identity theft, or would I also fill out that form if my accounts have been compromised, if I think my Social Security has been compromised?
I'm glad you brought that up, Nick, because whether you're a victim of tax fraud-related identity theft, or perhaps you're a victim of identity theft where you've maybe filed a local police report, we ask that folks send in that affidavit, prepare it and send it in so we can control or put a flag on the account. And then that way, perhaps we can engage them to and work with them to get an identity protection PIN.
Okay. And Anna Marie, what resources are available through Justice and Consumer Services if someone thinks that they've become a victim?
Definitely. Well, the first step, we like to be proactive. So as said, we go out and give presentations in the community to arm the consumers with the information, reduce their chances of falling victim. If they feel that they have become victim of identity theft just in general, they need to contact whatever's been compromised. If it's bank accounts, contact your bank, credit cards, your credit card company, Social Security Administration, and so forth. There's a lot of information. They can contact our department directly, and we can speak with them one-on-one about their specific situation and advise them. We also have publications that will take them step by step through the process because it can be overwhelming for them. Of course, you know, there's panic. Has this been affected? Has this been compromised? So it'll take you step by step who you need to contact, what you need to do, and then you can record all that information so that you have the dates and the contact information available.
Well, that's great. And Jim, you brought up the IP PIN, the Identity Protection PIN. Could you describe that program for viewers and also share any other resources that are available on an annual basis for past victims?
Sure. IRS has initiated an Identity Protection Personal Identification Number pilot, which is an additional layer of protection for individuals who've either been a victim of ID theft or been a victim of tax fraud-related ID theft. That process is available to Florida citizens because Florida is #1 for ID theft. And so when the citizen goes to file their tax return electronically, they'll have options online to navigate to a location where they'll answer a series of questions that only they should know to authenticate their identity. And through that process, they'll be issued an IP PIN. It's a 6-digit number, and I don't want to confuse it with electronic filing numbers, but it's an IP PIN. That 6-digit number can be placed on that tax return, and then that will protect that and their account from being victimized during that tax period. In addition to that, IRS.gov has a lot of great information with regard to tax scams. Anna Marie mentioned one recently about the IRS impersonation scam, where people are calling you and telling you owe money and threatening you with arrest. Of course, we don't do business that way. You find out about what you owe IRS either from a phone call you make or a letter you receive. So IRS.gov is a great resource, and I would warn people about that particular scam, which is pervasive and it's been ongoing for more than a year.
And you mentioned with the IP PIN that any Florida resident can get that then? They don't have to be a victim?
They don't have to be a victim, but right now it's in a pilot process, so you have to file electronically to get that PIN unless you are a victim of ID theft, where previously you may have been issued this IP PIN in past years.
Okay. And as far as the process, how long does that take? If your identity has been stolen, false tax return filed, on average, how long does it take to end up getting your refund? It
could take a long time. It could take 3 months to 6 months, and that depends on whether we're in filing season, because, Nick, we're not hiring any new people. You know, funding is difficult these days, and so we have to shift resources. So it could be anywhere from 3 months to 6 months to longer, depending on the particular situation, but it's much better today than it was a year ago. And with regard to fix your tax account, even though it may take a little bit longer than what we would hope, but even though we're shortening those timeframes, it does take a long time, like Anna Marie mentioned, to contact those credit bureaus and overall repair your account, you know, your credit. So that's something that we want to make sure folks direct themselves to do as well.
And Anna Marie, where can viewers go to find out more information about classes and presentations where they can learn more about how to protect their identity?
They can call our department directly at 727-464-6200, or they can log on to our website at pinellascounty.org/consumer, and we'll be happy to schedule a presentation for their group or organization. It's completely free, and we have a variety of topics that we can speak on.
Wonderful. Well, I think we've got a lot of information here today, and I really appreciate both of you joining us and sharing all the information you both have with our viewers and with Pinellas County citizens.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you.
And remember, being proactive is the best defense for protecting your identity. If you would like to see a repeat of this presentation, visit www.pinellascounty.org/eSeries. If you would like more information about identity theft, visit our website or the IRS website. And if you have any questions about today's topic, email them to communications-media1@pinellascounty.org, and we'll get back with you. Join us again next time for another edition of Good to Know right here on PCC-TV. I'm Nick Zoller, and this is Good to Know.